Alrighty, hello every folks, and welcome to a quick little discussion here because I wanted to do a little follow-up video from when I was discussing repairing Vitas and PSPs earlier, because I realized that I never actually covered a very important aspect of it, which is just common scams that you might potentially run into. So, seeing as I kind of ran into one the other day, I wanted to quickly cover some of those and, show, less show, more talk about what you might potentially run into out there. So, the thing is, for PSPs, like, usually you won't run into anything. It's a device that was so common and is so recognizable that in most cases, aside from somebody making a mistake, like, let's say, mistaking 2000s and 3000s or something like that, I mean, most people haven't even heard of the PSP Street or any of that. So, in most cases, yeah, more than likely, the only thing you would ever run into for that is going to be that 2 or 3000 mistake, which it's simple to make. For those that didn't know, all you got to do to tell the difference between them, like if you don't have the back cover open, is just the 3000s, the newer ones, they have rounded buttons, and then you've got like half crescent buttons for the originals, or the 2000s. The 1000s are pretty obvious because them suckers are chunky, but either way. Moving on here. So, for Vitas, though, Vitas are one of those things where it's rare enough and its value is high enough that in most cases you can still see people trying to pull like scams and things for those things, which is unfortunate, but it kind of comes with the territory. Now, I kind of just wanted to share one that I ran into the other day, because just so you know, it is possible to actually recover out of those potential scams there, but you kind of got to know a few tricks in order to make it happen. Now, what had happened, so okay, I let me just give you a little bit of background on this. So I was looking for a Vita because of all kinds of recent technical issues, as well as the fact that I just kind of missed the old thing, So I was told that that my original one had gotten lost in the mail. Basically, it was a situation where the person who was supposed to be receiving it claimed they never got it. I saw it get picked up, but ultimately, I don't actually know what ended up resulting out of that situation, because in the end, it seemed like that person had gotten insurance from the post office. I basically have no clue where the device itself went, and yeah, ultimately, no harm, no foul for the buyer and customer side, but it just was a weird mystery that the post office picked up a thing. It had tracking on there, but they just never bothered to update the tracking. So, like, they never scanned it in or anything, so God only knows where the hell the thing ended up. For anyone in that situation, by the way, apparently the post office will either go through a long, convoluted process where it takes about 2 or 3 months for it to circle back as returned mail, or potentially it might end up going to Georgia, where it's more or less permanently lost in a giant football field of endless packages with almost no identifiable information with them. You can file claims, but they even admit themselves, like, the odds of actually finding anything are slim. So, either way, that's kind of just its own thing with the post office. It's got its own problems here. Like, for anyone that's unfamiliar with our post office issues stateside right now, some political nonsense last year resulted in a more or less gutting of the post office, so it just doesn't deliver stuff right. It's a really weird situation. Anywho, so back to the actual guy that was pulling a scam, though. So what this guy did, their kind of cover story going into the whole thing was that they were a dad that was more or less spite selling all their kids' electronics, which, based off the listings on their account, sure, that checks out. Saying that they were failing at school, and so he just decided, screw it, they just don't get anything anymore. And, being a dad myself, I can absolutely see somebody doing that. Like, if, the kids got a scholarship or whatever else, and they just wound up in a situation where they're just throwing it all away for absolutely nothing, then yeah, if I didn't know the value of something, probably would just sell it for less than the listing price. For a little bit of context here, this one was actually listed at $65, which is suspiciously low, but that's presumably why that story was there. Okay, so a few things here. First of all, normally you wouldn't even run into this situation because this was through OfferUp. I would honestly recommend never using OfferUp for anything. It's what became of Letgo. It's kind of a trash site, but you know, sometimes when you see a good deal, you gotta check it out at least. Now, you might be saying, wait, won't you just lose money checking it out? Well, not necessarily. See, as awful as PayPal might be for just about anything else, if you are on the buying side of things, they do at least a pretty reasonable job. Like, if you catch a scam fast enough, you can actually just go and get your money back almost immediately, usually without even needing to talk to anybody. So, for what it's worth, they do that job reasonably well. Like, in this particular case, this guy ended up kind of blowing his cover, so to speak, fairly early on, so they had it for $65. I mean, I had already found a better deal that made a lot more sense, but we'll get to that in a moment. But so this guy had asked for $65, whatever else. I sent that. I figured, okay, if they don't make a stink over the shipping, it's probably fake, and I can go try to get a refund immediately. They do make a stink over the shipping, so okay, that's actually a good sign, because it shows that somebody's actually planning to ship something. But the shipping amount doesn't make any sense. Like, normally it's about $10 to $16 to ship one of these things. In this particular case, they decide that they're going to ask for $30. So, you know, I'm thinking, okay, they undersold it. Maybe they knew. So we're just going to go ahead and just assume that's at least somewhat legit and go from there. So, you know, end up looking. And yeah, sure enough, not really seeing anything, not seeing anything come up. I'm asking him for information on this package, nothing. So, I'm looking a little sketchy already, but whatever. So, they send a picture that shows somebody putting a package on a scale or whatever else. So, okay, maybe it's legit. The quality is unbelievably grainy to the point where it's almost suspicious, but again, red flag, but not necessarily completely fake. There may still be possibilities here. So, I continue looking into it, and I should probably mention before this, what you want to do is go and ask them to submit a bunch of information, like, for example, you ask them to go through a bunch of menus. Like, if you're familiar with the menus of the system, or if you're familiar with the games in its library, or you can see them on the screen, what's worth doing is having them confirm, like, let's say you have them put a particular color in the background, and you have them go through particular menus. So going through this, I was able to verify that, sure enough, yes, they do have a device. Actually, I probably still wouldn't have proceeded with the purchase if they hadn't provided this information. Because not only were they providing that info, but there was also a sign of something that had gone wrong. So normally, if you're buying a Vita, you're going to want something that has some kind of flaw in it in order to get a decent deal. Most of the time, if they're in perfect shape, if somebody kept it in perfect shape, they're probably aware of its value. So, in this particular case, yeah, I could see that somebody had tried to do a custom firmware on it and botched it. Like, they got it working enough to the point where they were able to get a PSP emulator on it, but it was showing error messages out the everywhere. So, okay, you know what? That I can understand that. If somebody's panic selling it because they screwed up a custom firmware install, whatever. You know, that's believable. I can see that happening. So, all right, so we proceed on. We keep checking a few other things, verify that it can actually launch Vita games. So in this particular case, it had XCOM Enemy Unknown on there, which is pretty rare. Like, all things considered, you wouldn't see too many people just having that on their Vita. So, you know, they were able to show that it can launch. So, fine. It's believable. Moving on. But the funny part is they ended up blowing their cover in the dumbest way possible. See, up to this point, they seem to have had it figured out. They seem to have figured out that, okay, they need to actually have a device to be able to pull this off, to be able to show that, you know, verify that they own it. But what actually ended up giving them away wasn't the device, wasn't anything else, but the fact that they had no idea how shipping works. Because, you see, they had decided to charge $30 extra for the shipping, which, okay, like I said earlier, they might just be trying to get extra, trying to cover their costs for selling the thing at $65. It's unsavory, but whatever. You know, I can understand that somebody would do that. It's online businesses, and they will do that. So, so what ends up happening at this point is that he decides to get greedy. He actually decides to try and request another $20, insisting that the first one was for the paperwork for the shipping label, and that the second one was for the actual shipping label, which he refused to call a shipping label, but kept calling a shipping tag. Which, yeah, that's such a crappy feeling when you realize, what's happening there. But yeah, sure enough, it wound up being a scam. Just ended up going to the automated thing on PayPal and just got everything back right away. And that was kind of the end of that. But it was disappointing. But just figured it was a story worth sharing, because if you are looking for a cheap Vita and stuff like that, that is something that you will have to keep an eye out for. Because unfortunately, most of the kind of main sources, Amazons and things like that, them suckers are going to be expensive. So there's that. All right, now, as far as the obvious scams go, okay, there's that one. There's the basically anytime you see one in perfect condition that doesn't have a good story behind it, that one's pretty obvious. If you see any if you see any where you can't tell that it actually says Vita or shows any of the branding on it, that's probably one of the ones where somebody's trying to sell a Chinese knockoff. I think I mentioned this earlier, but that's not that common. I haven't, in a few years of searching for them, I haven't really seen that particular one come up that often. With the most common one by far being this one where they never intended to actually sell it in the first place. So hopefully this helps to avoid that situation if you were in the market for one of these things. But just so you know, that stuff is out there. It can happen. It inevitably happens to everybody at some point. I wouldn't recommend ever going through Zelle. I haven't seen them having any particularly good options for actually getting money back. Usually it's just sent and it's sent. PayPal says that it's immediately sent, but they can usually recall it. So, at least there's that. Oh my goodness, no, doors, why? Yeah, this game is nutso. By the way, if you're ever looking for a very interesting sim experience on the PS1, definitely if you missed Warhawk, it is a fascinating game. It's basically like, I want to say it's almost like a Ace Combat kind of deal, but not really. It's like it basically takes all of that same idea and just takes it up to 11 well before the series actually did. But it's like you got 2 lives to get through the entire game is the strange thing. Which is weird because they actually put that into the mechanics. Like in this particular case, yeah, you... come on, give me the Doomsday Bomb, and there we go. Actually, just slamming your plane into the last boss twice is one of the mechanics. So if you can only do it once, I think it still gives you an ending where you win, but not really. If you have 2 lives by the time you get to that point, you can win, but you don't get the best ending. And then if you end up getting to the end completely deathless, then yeah, you can sacrifice both of your teleport planes. These old cutscenes, though, they're so cheesy. I love it. And then you fight a volcano. Because of course you do. Oh, man. All right, so I think that covers everything that I wanted to cover for this. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll try to help in whatever way I can. Ultimately, if you're wondering about the end of the story, I did end up finding a Vita that had a... I didn't cover that part. As far as defense... Okay, so to continue on here. So if you do run into the situation where you've got you're looking into a Vita there, you want to know what kind of stuff you can kind of accept being wrong with it. Even something like a screen crack, which is for example, the one that I ended up finding for a discount here, actually does have a screen crack on there. It's not necessarily a deal breaker. See, when it comes to the anatomy of these devices, they're kind of unusual. So the screen is basically like a phone. It, technically speaking, the actual important bits are all going to be behind it, but it's going to be hardened glass that's making up the front cover of that thing. If it has a crack that is basically leading off to the side, in most cases, as far as I've seen, that doesn't really tend to lead to many performance issues. It's just kind of a visual blemish. But those screens I have seen coming up for about $20-$30 as far as just a replacement screen. Some cases they end up being a little bit more, but typically you can find them for that price. As far as something let's say, like an analog stick, you probably wouldn't even like left analog stick drift is very common for Vitas. It is probably the main reason I've seen people panic selling them, because they'll go and they'll accidentally do the reset trick, which is to rotate it clockwise 3 times. It just sort of like low key recalibrates itself. But like somebody will accidentally do that, and they think they've temporarily fixed it, and then it'll come back, and they'll be like, okay, I do this little trick. I'm just going to go ahead and just sell it before anybody notices. And yeah, that is the ideal situation, because to fix analog stick drift, really just a Q-tip, alcohol. If you're looking instead for, for something, okay, analog stick drift, that's basically always going to happen at some point. They're just devices that are very prone to it. There's a lot of little moving parts to those analog sticks, because they tried to make them more precise, but really they just made them more breakable. If you're looking for a solution to fix that, just get a thumb cap. If you clean them out, you have a thumb cap on there, usually that'll end up avoiding the issue for the most part. If you find yourself in a position where... So, wow. Getting completely annihilated over here. I completely lost my train of thought, sorry. But okay, if you find yourself in that kind of odd position where you don't know whether it's permanently damaged or not, they can be replaced. You can just kind of go in there and put completely new analog sticks on. I did that for my one that I ended up selling. It's not a not nerve-wracking experience, but it is doable. It's definitely on the scarier side of things, because you basically have to take apart the entire device in order to get to the one on the right side, but the one on the left, you really only have to take apart about half of it. If you've ever taken a laptop apart, the experience is relatively similar, where you basically have to take off the front, then you flip it over, then you take off the back, and then you pray you don't have a touchscreen on there, and you forget to reattach the touchscreen a couple times if it is. So, that's kind of its own thing. Yeah, I cannot even tell you how many times I took that thing apart and completely forgot to put the touchscreen back on, which is fine. The thing's kind of crappy. What can you do? Yeah, it's a very wonky touchscreen for sure. Like, at least on the back there. The front one's got its uses. I mean, like, for playing Salt and Sanctuary and stuff like that, it ends up working out just fine. You do need it for stuff like XCOM if for some reason you decided to play that version. I just keep trying to circle around and hit this thing over here to make the dangle Kano spawn, but keep messing that up. Sorry, at this point, this has just turned into Let's Play Warhawk. This is such a cool game, though. Like, I find myself going back to it pretty regularly. It's just a fun experience. I wouldn't call it incredibly balanced or anything, but it's a dang fun game. Wait, pick up the upgrade. By the way, that Doomsday Bomb right there, definitely what you need for this level. Basically just clears everything out. It's pretty darn handy. And now time to go into a boss fight with no materials, because that's the best way to handle things here. So yeah, just kind of taking a quick step back on PSPs real quick. I should probably mention that, yeah, they do get that analog stick drift thing, but I'm assuming just due to the fact that it's a pretty simple, like, flat nub situation, you really don't see too many, like, legitimate issues coming out of that. So, like, usually you just drop a bunch of alcohol in there and problem solved. We can safely decide that all of these devices are pretty much alcoholics. There's a lot of... Oh, shoot, you just got my friggin' cockpit blown off. Man. This was on the PS1, I just want to point out. Like, there's so much stuff going on here that would be attempted in later games, and they just nailed it back on the PS1. It was basically like one of the launch titles for the PS1, if I recall, too. Also lost my Super Swarmers, darn. Actually, yeah, if you've ever, by the way, if you ever played Twisted Metal, if you were wondering what Warthog's whole deal was with the rainbow missiles, it's the Super Swarmers from this. It's the same people that made them. Also, probably shouldn't be ramming things, is the thing. Any other PSP advice that comes to mind? Or Vita advice. Yeah, so for the Vita, obviously, go out of your way to try to avoid ever opening up one of them, ideally. It's not... Again, it's not that they're not fixable or anything. It's just that, for the most part, they are far more complicated to put together. There's a lot more stuff that can go wrong, and potentially a lot more value loss if it does go wrong. So normally would recommend trying to avoid opening them up as much as possible. Usually you don't have to. Like, as much as I kind of say that PSPs are the, unbreakable super devices or whatever else, really Vitas are arguably even more resilient. Because I will say, I have technically had 2 PSPs break on me before for different reasons. Both of those reasons usually involving keeping it in a vest pocket and swinging around rapidly and having it smash into a wall. Well, one of them involving a shopping cart running straight into one. I just want to at least show off this dang volcano. Oh, well, there we go. Got the game over ending anyway. By the way, another unique thing about, old-timey Warhawk here, they actually had unique endings for losing in every single stage of the game. And they're all pretty darn dark. Like, hell, in one of them, I think, one of them winds up friggin' crucified and the other one ends up being a slave or something. Like, it's such a weird thing. Oh, I guess this one's kind of ambiguous. I mean, they both make it, weirdly enough. Anyway. Okay, that's enough of that. You guys have a good one. Take care.